will, turn your Bibles to 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. Now, if this is the wrong scripture, Eddie, give it to me. This is a true saying. If a man desire the office of a bishop, he desireth a good work. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. Not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetous, one that ruleth well in his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must have a good report of them which are without, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil.
Good evening. It is good to see each of you here tonight. And yes, that is the correct reading. So Eddie did not get that wrong. And there is a method to my madness when it comes to it, which will be clear in a moment. We are continuing our study of the book of 1 Peter. We are getting ready to start the last chapter of the book, chapter 5. And up to this point, Peter has been addressing the individual nature of suffering. Everything that he has been saying would be applied to each individual in the way that they are suffering themselves. But he changes his address here in chapter 5. It's not so much about the individual now as it is the effect that it has on the collective church. As Christians suffer, the church also suffers. We cannot differentiate between the two. We cannot assume that what is going on in my life is not going to have some effect on the church that I am a part of. Just like for you, what you have going on in your life will have an effect on what happens here. As was mentioned in a sermon a couple weeks ago, we as Christians are not islands. We are not individual blobs that just float around. We are connected. We are woven together as a family. And because of this nature of persecution that the church is going to endure, God saw fit that the church have very specific leadership roles. And so that is what he is going to be addressing here at the beginning of chapter 5. The leadership of the church, because the persecution going on in the lives of individual Christians is going to have a bearing on the church. And so how will its leaders respond? From our reading, these men are chosen in accordance with very specific qualifications. I had 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7 read so that we could have in our minds the type of men that are to be our shepherds, our elders, our bishops. These are all synonymous terms, all referring to the same office. In his letter, Peter now addresses these noble men. In days of peace, their responsibility is difficult. My dad served as an elder for a congregation where they lived in Indiana for several years before they moved to Kentucky. And in the best of times, an elder's job is difficult because of how serious it is. But in days of turmoil, even more so. When the church can be disrupted by such persecution and suffering, the leadership must be able to watch out for their flock. And Peter begins by enumerating what I call his credentials. Let's read the first verse of 1 Peter chapter 5 together. Turn your Bibles over there. We'll be spending the remainder of our time within the book of 1 Peter chapter 5. But verse 1 says, "The elders who are among you I exhort, I who am a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed." Elders are not perfect men, but they are exceptional men. Like we saw, they meet a very specific set of qualifications. And those are qualifications that each Christian should be striving to exude in their lives, but those appointed as elders have done so. And because these men are exceptional in nature, great care should be taken in how they are addressed. A warning was given to Timothy in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 19. It says, "Do not receive an accusation against an elder except from 2 or 3 witnesses." That is not to say that they are untouchable, but to say they should be held in a higher regard because of their position. And so what Peter is demonstrating in this short verse in chapter 5 and verse 1, he is demonstrating that he has the authority as a fellow elder and as an apostle of Christ to exhort or to admonish those who are elders. "I'm one of you," he says. "Therefore listen to what I have to say." Elders have a very specific job and a very crucial role to play during these rough and tumultuous times. For the church to survive persecution, she must have strong leadership and submissive members. And within this first section of chapter 5, Peter addresses both, because both are instrumental in the church's success. To begin with, we're going to look at elders are tasked with serving well. So let's read verses 2 through 4 together. Peter says, "Shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away." The verb that Peter uses, poimano, translated shepherd, means to tend a flock. Easy enough to understand from our translation of it, right? To be a shepherd is to look after, to tend a flock. What is included within shepherding? If I were to ask you, what does a shepherd do in regards to a flock of sheep, how would you answer? They are tasked with multiple things. We just have a broad sense in which we say they shepherd the flock, but they are responsible for feeding the flock, providing sustenance for that which they are looking after. They are tasked with protecting the flock, keeping danger away, keeping those things outside which are harmful to the flock if brought in, steering the flock away from danger if need be. If the flock as a whole is moving towards a destination that is dangerous, then the shepherd will steer the flock away from danger. These men are to shepherd the flock that is among them. The significance of this is it quite literally means those in your care. It denotes the location of the shepherd and the sheep. This means that they are both in the same place. A shepherd cannot watch over a flock that is down the road, can he? What good is a shepherd sitting in the barn when the sheep are out in the pasture? He cannot do his job. And so when it comes to elders within the Lord's church, elders cannot oversee a flock that is over the hill or down the road. Our shepherds are not responsible for what goes on at C Street or Crandall or Shady or any other congregation. The shepherds at Stoney Creek ensure that the Stoney Creek flock is doing what it needs to do, heading where it needs to head, being fed as it needs to be fed. So let's notice how these men are to shepherd. Peter uses very distinct phrases here that we would do well to observe. He says first that they are serving as overseers. This means to look at closely, to examine with great intent. Often we balk at such examination, don't we? Oh, we don't like people getting too close to us. We don't like people sticking their nose where we think it does not belong. We'll keep people at a distance. But don't go prying around in my private life. I have a question for you. What do we have to fear? Do we have something in our lives that maybe we don't want people finding out? Something that perhaps we're ashamed of, some behavior or some habit that we know we should not be engaging in, but yet we willingly do? Our shepherds desire our faithfulness and our growth. How are they going to know what we need if they don't know us? Have you been raised believing that elders were only there to discipline wrongful actions? That was my upbringing for many years. I thought the elders were only there to scold and slap your wrist when you've done something wrong. I quickly learned that was not the case. A good eldership will not just take care of the problems, but they will also exhort and uplift everyone. They are to make sure the sheep are doing what the sheep need to be doing. In order to shepherd the flock, elders must know what the flock needs. We as the sheep of the flock should not push back, saying, "You don't need to know that much about me. Who are you asking about my life like that? What I do outside of here is my business, not yours." They are responsible for the flock. Albeit the flock may not always be right in this building, though, are they? We don't all live together. We don't all share the same homes. But yet our shepherds, are still responsible for us, not just within these walls. Oh, we talk about it and we brag about how we are to be the church outside of these walls. Take church outside the building. But when it comes to the elders questioning our lives and trying to get to know us better, that's taking it too far. We can't have that. Our elders must serve as overseers, which means they need to get to know their sheep. And they need to know what we need in order for them to do their job well. They also are to serve willingly. An elder cannot be forced into the position. Forced service can come in one of two ways. And maybe there's more. These were the two that I could think of. One, a man is forced into service against his own desire. He doesn't desire the position. Maybe there are those around that think he's qualified and would make a good shepherd, of the congregation, but within himself, he is not ready to take on the task. Notice what Timothy first was told by Paul in 1 Timothy 3:1. This is a faithful saying. If a man desires the position of a bishop, he desires a good work. What has to be there first? The desire to serve as an elder. A man that does not desire to serve as an overseer cannot be placed in against his will. But another way that this can take place is a man is forced into service against the knowledge of the congregation. And by this I mean, the man does not meet all the qualifications. And this is known to the congregation. Maybe he's very argumentative in nature. That's not to be the mentality of an elder. But even though this is known, he is still placed in the position of an elder, given a seat in the eldership. A man who serves as a shepherd must do so because his heart desires such a work. It is in political systems where people are granted seats of authority without any kind of qualifications. You look back through the history of the European monarchs and how many were thrust into power just because it made an alliance with someone else, because it was a good business deal. They had no reason to occupy a throne. They had no desire to. Many times they had no qualification, surely. But yet, we're still going to put them in power. We cannot have that mentality when it comes to the leadership within the Lord's church. Men who serve must do so willingly. But they also must serve eagerly. This stands in contrast to the phrase, not for dishonest gain, at the end of verse 2. Men may see an opportunity to pad their own pockets when it comes to serving as an elder. And we say, well, how would that even be possible? There's many ways in which it can be. But financial gain should not be the driving force behind a man wanting to serve as an elder. Imagine the persecution that the church was going through at the time when Peter was writing this. The suffering that the church was enduring. And as an elder, I have people approaching me, members of my flock approaching me, saying, help me. What do I do? Well, for a few coin, I can protect you. Or for, a small payment of gratitude, I'll see to it that you're taken care of. It's not so far-fetched. But elders do not serve for the money. They must serve enthusiastically, their zeal being for God and not for any financial gain that they may receive. This stipulation may seem odd, but given the scenario I just painted, it's not that out of place. People can see opportunities to make a few extra dollars and do so at the expense of what they are supposed to do. And lastly, Peter says that they are to be examples. Authority can be a dangerous thing. When abused, it can give one a false sense of power and superiority over others. If left unchecked, authority can allow one to feel elevated over the one who bestowed the authority to begin with. Don't we see that with some denominations? primarily Roman Catholics. Oh, the Pope says he serves as the vicar of Christ, the spokesman of Christ. But he has elevated himself to a point above Christ, to where now he is able to dictate law, to dictate morality, to change things that are clearly stated in the Bible, to say, well, I don't like that, so I'm going to just make up something else. He has elevated himself above that who he claimed to be serving. That's what power can do to an individual. Elders must realize that they are in a position of service to God. As such, they must resist ruling with an iron fist, as we may say. Being tasked with leading the sheep, part of their responsibility is to do so by example. The word for example, tupos, it means to make an impression. It can be likened to the impression left by a seal in wax. You know, official correspondence would be put in an envelope and closed, and a glob of wax would be placed over it, and whether it be the king or his spokesman would take the signet ring and press in the wax, thereby declaring this is official. It was making an impression. Elders are to make an imprint on their flock. They are to make an impression on us. How many have heard the phrase, do as I say, not as I do? Right? Maybe we've even said that to our children out of frustration. You know, do as I tell you to do, not what you see me doing. That cannot be the mentality among the shepherds of God's flock. They are to lead by example, impressing that example upon the church, so that they in turn will do the same. When Christ, the chief shepherd, returns, elders who have served well will receive their crown of glory. The chief shepherd, when he comes back, he is going to reward those who have served his church as shepherds. In the face of persecution, elders can be tempted to conduct themselves in ways that are contrary to their office. They can be tempted just as we can. We are tempted to walk in ways that are contrary to how a Christian should. They are tempted to walk in ways that are contrary to an eldership. Leading well through persecution will not only benefit themselves, but it's also going to benefit their flock. Having a strong leadership in the church is crucial to its success, not only in the good times, but also in the difficult times. But Peter doesn't just stop with the leadership. A lot of times we like to, don't we? We like to just say, well, the buck stops with them. But Peter ties all of us in together. We as the flock must follow well. Let's read verses 5 through 7. It says, likewise, you younger people, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that He may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon Him, for He cares for you. Responsibility falls not only to the elders, but also to the flock. Peter uses the word likewise in verse 5. Likewise, you younger. As the shepherds must adhere to their requirements, so must the flock adhere to their requirements. And Peter addresses this in two manners. First, he addresses specifically those who are younger men. And you may say, well, it doesn't say men, it says people. A closer look at the original language will bear out the fact that he is addressing specifically younger men. And there's a very good reason why. Youthful men can be impetuous and stubborn and often resent those in authority. We have a hard time submitting ourselves because we want to be the ones in charge. And so we don't like having to put ourselves under someone else. Peter, understanding this and through inspiration, pointedly addresses those who would be younger men in the congregation, saying, you put yourselves under the oversight of your elders. The elders care about our spirituality. They care about our success as Christians. They are not seeking to bind us with unbearable shackles. And many times that is what we portray them as trying to do. Where they are wanting to put all these rules and regulations on us and do this, don't do this, and oh, it's just, I want to live my own life. That's not what good elders, what scriptural elders are seeking to do. As younger men, we must keep our pride in check. Pride is a big problem, and Peter is going to address that momentarily. But secondly, he addresses all the congregation. Likewise, you younger people or men, submit yourselves to your elders. Yes, all of you. So not just the young bucks, but everyone included. While we may be the more likely to challenge authority, all must be in submission to their elders. We have a lot of guys in here that enjoy hunting. Back in the day when I used to hunt myself, what were the deer that you saw most of the time causing the biggest ruckus? Oh, it was those young bucks, wasn't it? Scraping up a storm, rattling around. Those big trophy bucks, they knew to keep quiet. Don't draw attention to yourself. Oh, but those high-spirited ones, you could pick them out in a hailstorm because of all the racket they're making. Decisions can be made by elderships that some do not agree with. When we look at situations, we all probably have our own solution that we would employ. If it were me, I would do this, we may say. And our elders may make a decision about a specific event. And we may look at that decision and say, well, I wouldn't have made that decision. And maybe we wouldn't have. Maybe we would have tried something else. But the fact is, the eldership made the decision to go this direction. The problem is, this manner of thinking, well, I wouldn't have made that decision, can lead some to say, therefore, I will not abide by it. Therein lies the problem. We're all differently, we all think differently, we all approach problems in our own way. That's not the issue. The issue is when we decide, because it's not my way, I'm not going to do it their way. Brethren, our shepherds deserve our loyalty. Imagine a literal flock of sheep milling around in a field, and the shepherd is trying to corral them for the night, and you have a couple over here saying, you know, I wouldn't pick that spot if I were him. Therefore, I'm not going to go to that spot. I'm going to go over here where I think it's a better place to be. What have you just done? You've separated yourself from the safety of the flock, from the watchful eye of the shepherd, and you are now at risk. Why would we do that to ourselves? We have enough problems as it is. Why would we want to compound them by shaking a rebellious fist at our shepherds in order to achieve submission? Peter says we must clothe ourselves with humility. The word for clothe is actually a very long word in the Greek, and I'm not going to try to pronounce this one. But what it means is to be covered. Again, it seems pretty straightforward, right? We understand what it means to be clothed with something, to be covered. But what is the purpose of a covering? For one, it protects us. The weather getting colder, we put on our warmer jackets, right? Because we want to be protected when we go outside. It also keeps us modest. Modesty is a large part of humility. And when we clothe ourselves, when we cover ourselves properly, we are going to be modest. We are to have a humble opinion of ourselves. That is the basic definition of humility. Having a humble opinion of ourselves. When we have a proper understanding of ourselves, we have a proper relationship with each other. It's all connected together. The manner in which I conduct myself is going to reflect in the way that I engage myself with you. God is opposed to those who think more highly of themselves than they ought. He doesn't like people who have a haughty mindset. But I want to ask you this question. How can we say that I submit myself to God if we refuse to submit ourselves to the shepherds appointed by His will? The two cannot be separated from each other. If we are going to submit ourselves to God, then we must submit ourselves to the shepherds that are tasked with protecting His flock. We, as God's flock, must follow our shepherds well. Remember, this is coming at the end of a discussion that Peter has been having regarding suffering and persecution. This is not out of place. Because when an eldership serves well and leads well, the church will be safe. When a flock follows its leadership well, the church will be safe. Persecution and suffering is going to come. We're foolish if we think that it will never happen to us. It will in some form, in some fashion. Persecution will be seen by the Lord's church. Shepherds that lead well will help the church to navigate such perilous times. They are put into that position for a reason. Trust their decisions. Trust their instincts in their study and follow them. A congregation that follows well will glory in its endurance. Remember the title of our series, Glorious Endurance. Part of that is submitting to our leadership. And so I want us all to leave tonight resolved to fulfill our individual roles with humility. That is what it takes for a congregation and its leadership to work cohesively, is that we be humble and we not think highly of ourselves. This has not been a lesson designed to point fingers at any one group. I believe eldership here is doing a remarkable job in leading the flock and watching out for our well-being. And I believe that the flock is doing a tremendous job of following. But that doesn't mean that we don't need reminders and we don't need encouragement, because when things get tough is when we start to forget what our purpose is. And I really think that's why Peter decided to place this particular discussion in his letter where he did. After going through the whole suffering will come, this is how you suffer, this is why you suffer, he wanted to highlight the importance of leadership through suffering and submission through suffering. But you know, none of this really matters when you are outside the body of Christ. I don't know how much I can emphasize that. That Peter was writing this letter of encouragement to those who had become Christians. Not to those who were outside the body, but to those who were a part of the body and suffering. If I'm going to suffer, I want to have the best chance of making it through. I want to come through the other end better than when I entered, right? This is the place to do that. God has created this body partly so that we can help each other through these tough times. The uncertainty that surrounds us on a daily basis is maddening. The loss that we experience is devastating. How else are we going to make it through but with God? And we only have access to His help by conforming to His plan of salvation. And I want you to think about yourself tonight. Are you able to call upon God for help? Are you able to rely on Him to see you through a trying time in your life? If you're outside of His body, His Son's body, you can't. Why don't you change that tonight? Become a Christian, submit to His plan of salvation. Leaving here knowing that whatever befall you, you have the Almighty Creator that you can rely on. There is no greater feeling than that. And secondly, you are now part of a large, loving family that only wants success and achievement for everyone who is a part of it. We all want each other to reach that final destination that we all are striving for. And we can walk hand in hand that narrow road that gets bumpy at times, that has ups and downs and curves. We can help each other navigate this perilous life. Become a part of that family tonight. If you are a Christian and you have strayed away from the path, you are a sheep that has wandered away from the flock and desire to be reunited. but you have sin in your life that needs addressed, if it is of a personal, private nature, take care of that between you and God in your seat. Make sure that you leave here tonight reconciled with Him. If you would like us to pray with you and for you, for forgiveness, for strength going forward, we would be more than happy to do that for you tonight. But you have to let us know what your need is. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, do so by coming to the front as we stand and sing.